So welcome. For me is an honor to be moderating this panel of wonderful speakers representing the United States, but why not? We are all immigrants in this country, so it is wonderful. I think that it talks a lot about the deportation of the immigrants in another country. Before we start, I would like to give a very short context of what we are talking about, and in United States. So United States is a huge country, as you already know, and the total population it's about 328 million. And when we're talking about immigrants in United States, about 14% of the population are foreign-born or immigrants. We're talking about 45 million. So I'm just mentioning this because I know that we have participants from different countries, and this amount, sometimes it is much bigger than the full population of many European countries. Majority of the immigrants in United States, the large majority are coming from Mexico, but also we have a large percentage of immigrants coming from China and India. And in the recent years, migration from China and India, the newcomers, is much bigger than migrants from Mexico. So that has created a very interesting situation here in the United States. In terms of the COVID-19, as you might already know, United States, unfortunately, it's leading the cases, both for confirmed cases and the deaths of COVID-19 worldwide. We have almost 8 million confirmed cases of COVID as of today, and over 200,000 deaths due to COVID. And in regards of immigrants, the immigrants in the United States have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19, both for the disease and the socioeconomic consequences that this pandemic is bringing, not only in the United States, but all around the world. We don't have specific numbers of how many immigrants have been affected or have died for COVID, because usually for just confirmation cases, we don't collect the country of birth. So that is very tricky to know. But we know for sure that immigrants work in different industries that has been very, very affected for the COVID-19 cases, including the farm workers, the food processors, drivers, cleaners. A large group of immigrants have this kind of work, also working in hospitals, taking care of children or elderly, or taking care of sick people at homes. So they put them definitely at big risk. They have been considered like essential workers in the United States, but at the same time, they are very vulnerable because, as a different in the other countries, in the United States, access to health, it is limited, and especially is limited for immigrants. For undocumented immigrants, is very difficult to access health in general, and much less access to mental health. And even sometimes for documented immigrants here in the United States, it is very difficult to access health and mental health for the economic reasons, for the type of work, for the type of insurance that they have or they might not have, and also the lack of enough providers that are culturally and linguistically prepared to attend this kind of population. But now I'm going to explain you the panel, what we're going to do. We have a wonderful group of panelists. I'm so proud of this group, and thank you very much to all of you. The first presentation is going to be about building resilience and overcoming distress during COVID-19 and beyond, the lessons learned from the US-Mexico border by Dr. Luz Garcini from the UT Health San Antonio, and she's in Texas, Texas State. Then we will have the presentation on between COVID-19, wildfires, and hazardous air, visualizing emergency health education for refugees in California. That is will be done by Dr. Marius Koga and Dr. Mohammed Sadiq Hazrat Sai. I'm sorry, Dr. Sadiq. They are in California. And the last presentation will be about rebuilding the deterritorialized, I'm sorry, cultural memories by Mrs. Maria Elena Ferrer. After all the three panelists, then we will have the session for the questions and answers. So our first presenter, Dr. Luz Garcini, she is an assistant professor at the Center for Research to Advance Community Health at the University of Texas Health Science in San Antonio at the School of Medicine. And she's also a faculty scholar at the Baker Institute for Public Health at Rice University. And she has focused her research in identifying, understanding, and addressing the health needs of underserved immigrant families in the United States. So please welcome Dr. Garcini.
Thank you very much, Liliana, for that lovely introduction and for this opportunity to learn, collaborate, and share our ideas about what's happening around the world with our immigrants given the current pandemic. So next slide, please. This is just some of the acknowledgements for the people that have funded my work. Next slide, please. And to give you a walkthrough as to what I'll be talking to you within the next 10 minutes. So I'll be giving you a little bit of a background in terms of what's happening in the US-Mexico border, identifying what are some of the primary barriers that are contributing to health inequities during this current crisis, as well as how can we get out of it? What are some of the facilitators that are going to help us provide the resources for our immigrants that they need, and to invite everyone to think broadly for a call to action as to how we can make the difference during these unprecedented times that we are living. Next slide, please. So in terms of background and significance, next slide. The US-Mexico border. This is a fascinating area. You have it right there in orange is the United States and in yellow is Mexico. And you can see that the US-Mexico border is a large area expanding along 2,000 miles across the Mexico-US border that comprises 4 US states and 6 Mexican states. And I would like to talk about it from a binational perspective, because this is an area that is a constant influx of people across borders. And this has been a major source of tension right now within the current pandemic, because borders have been shut down, they have been closed, and there's people who leave and have to cross every day for work reasons, for family reasons, for healthcare reasons. So it has created a very, very complex dynamics. As you know, for migrant populations, it's an area of constant influx. We have had recently some policies that are very difficult for our immigrants, like the Remain in Mexico policy, where a lot of our immigrants coming to seek asylum in the United States must wait for their hearings in Mexico under very harsh and living conditions in tented camps with very limited resources. You can imagine within the current crisis. And, you know, also Mexico doesn't know how to address them, doesn't know what response to give to them. So they're experiencing rejection from both sides of the border. And of course, some of the asylum hearings have been stopped as a result of the current pandemic. So it's a densely populated area, mostly of Latino origin, but we have some states that also have a big Native American population or indigenous Latino immigrants that have moved to the United States. People vary tremendously in terms of their cultural background, different levels of acculturation. We have immigrations from first generation to second to third generation, which creates a lot of intergenerational conflict within the families. We have people who vary in socioeconomic status and political characteristics, but unfortunately, it's an area that experiences a lot of poverty and a lot of socioeconomic vulnerabilities. We have a lot of rural communities with very limited health and social resources. At the same time, we have had very harsh and high immigration enforcement that has created a lot of tension, fear, and mistrust in these communities. The image that you probably all of you have seen of families separated, of children being caged, of immigrants literally putting their children in the Mexico border and sending them with a backpack to cross the United States because their parents can't do them, are real. So it is happening. So there's definitely a humanitarian crisis at the border that needs to be addressed, and these complicating issues right now. We have an inadequate healthcare infrastructure, and as Liliana mentioned, we have seen this. There's not enough beds for the cases, there's not enough testing to get it done, in addition to the barriers that our immigrants are facing. Next slide, please. So we must remember that this area did not get was not in such a bad shape recently. This has a long-standing history. So the border is known to have a high burden of chronic and infectious diseases. Diabetes ran top, cardiovascular disease, asthma associated to poor environmental condition. And as you know, these are pre-existing conditions that increase the risk when a person gets COVID. Mental health are also of primary concern, primarily among our immigrants communities, because trauma is at the top of the list. All different sorts of traumatic events are happening at the border: exploitation, victimization, trafficking, in addition to what's happening in interdomestic violence, rape, and all sorts of traumatic events. Substance use is also going on the rise. So definitely, when people talk about mental health as the next pandemic, it's something that is at the forefront in this area. And obviously, we have seen a surge in COVID-19 cases due to the poor infrastructure that we have at the border. Next slide, please. So what we did, because we found out that there was a very little understanding in terms of all of the resources and the services that we're providing at the border as to how to address the primary stressors that these communities were facing, we decided to embark in going and ask our people, going and ask our communities, our key informants, our community health workers or promotoras, which are healthcare, unofficially healthcare workers that are at the forefront, to tell us what's happening. Why this surging in cases? How are people struggling? And what are some of the things that we can do? So we conducted several focus groups in the community. We interviewed several key informants. We had over 100 people participating, and we got a lot of information that I feel we're gonna start using to move interventions forward. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna start by painting the gloomy picture, just with a caveat that the population that I'm going to talk about is a highly resilient population, and there are many things that we can learn from our immigrants, as you all probably have seen throughout the world. So the first one is that there's compounded stresses associated with COVID-19 that are affecting our immigrants. At the top of the list is the economic factor. They're losing their jobs. They're facing economic hardship. They don't have the money that they traditionally used to send as remittances to their countries of origin. So there is a lot of anxiety and fear about not being able to provide for their families. They are terrified that if they come down with COVID, that will ban them from future employment. So as a result, people are not getting tested. People are not engaging in contact tracing to track the cases, just because of the fear of losing that economic sustainability, which unfortunately at the same time is increasing the cases because we're completely not having a control on it. The other one is obviously immigration. There is a terrible amount of distrust and fear in these communities. People are afraid, and this transcends undocumented or immigration legal status, because now we're hearing even from permanent residents that they're afraid, that people are saying, what if in my record, you know, people are start seeing that I had COVID-19, then it can be used as a ground to remove and take away my permanent resident status, or maybe even my citizenship. So it has created a paranoia among our immigrant community that they're afraid. And as a result, they're not engaging in the preventive measures that require to come forward. We have also heard of the presence of immigration and customs enforcement near testing sites that are deterring our immigrants even to go and try to get some testing or get access to resources. A lot of the time, legal documentation is required to get tested, at least in Texas. So that's making it even harder to access these services. There is a lot of inconsistent and confusing information, and that has taken a toll. It's creating a lot of confusion, despair. People no longer know where to trust or where to go to seek reliable information. There is a lot of family conflict. As I mentioned, we have the conflict across families where the first generation, for example, the first generations, are afraid of going out and getting tested. Or even when we start mentioning, even though the vaccine is not available, the possibility of getting a vaccine, they said, no, I don't trust it. Whereas we have our more acculturated generation said, no, this is our way forward. So it's creating a lot of clashes within our own immigrant families. Particular concern among those who have pre-existing chronic conditions because they have delayed their care, even if it was limited access to care. They're not seeking help. So if you have hypertension, you're not getting yourself checked, you're not going to get medications, resources are very scarce. And there's a lot, as Dr. Achotegui mentioned at the opening, said the social isolation is taking a toll on our communities. You know, I heard several of our colleagues from Japan talking about that. You know, for some time it's okay to use technology, but it gets to a point that for cultures in which we are used to the human touch, it's very difficult to survive it. Next slide, please. So this is the different types of effects that were reported associated to these stressors, you know, traditionally depression and anxiety. But the thing that I think strike most for me, and we need to start thinking when we develop our interventions, is the ones that you see towards your right. The diminished sense of self-efficacy. Our immigrants are known for knowing how to fix things, for knowing how to get out of a hole. And they're starting to have doubts about it, a diminished view of the self. What that means is like not being able to know if you're good enough. So what's happening? Maybe I'm not a good mom because I'm losing my patience with my kids. Maybe I'm not a good daughter or son because I can no longer send the remittances that my family needs. So it's creating a lot of conflict at the cognitive level that is very, very hard to undo. So this is why I think we need to start focusing our interventions of how do we grant them, how do we help them regain their strengths to keep moving forward? How do we help them find meaning and purpose in the experience to reveal themselves, to rid themselves of guilt and shame? Next slide, please. And here are the facilitators. The good news is that at the same time that we notice all of these stressors, we also find that an incredible amount of resilience. You know, our immigrants are leading the way and are setting an example to many of us as to how do you survive times in the face of adversity. One of the things that we find is the behavioral activation. What it means is engaging, keeping yourself busy in routines, whether it's gardening, whether it's cooking, whether it's cleaning, completely focusing your attention to that. Distraction strategies are at the top. Surprisingly, relaxation and mindfulness, the communities were very receptive to using these techniques to try to deal with the stress that we're facing. Mindfulness was interesting. It took the form of having walks, whether it was in their own backyard patio or around the block using their mask, and just focusing on the things that nature provides, listening to the birds, looking at the clouds, you know, just paying your attention on something that will allow your body to get some rest. In terms of stimulus control, one of the things they mentioned that was very helpful to them was starting to identify what triggered the symptoms of the stress. And one at the top of the list was the news. So people started turning off any information that will increase your anxiety, even if it was for a certain amount of time. So they found out this on their own. In trying to look for resources for information and education. The other fascinating strategies were the cognitive strategies. And I think these are important to know because this is how we can frame our health campaigns, our health messages, how we write the ways in which people need to engage in prevention strategies. So the first one is normalizing, helping people feel that they are not alone. Feeling stress, feeling all of these mental health concerns is understandable given the current situation. Validate the experience and help people, reassure people that they are not alone and that it is okay to feel in the way they're feeling, as long as they try to seek help and don't let it go too far. Reframing their situation. If a door closes, I can always find my way out through a window. And our immigrants are very good at that. One that is very powerful, and unfortunately one that has gotten America in a lot of trouble, is the difference between individualistic and collectivistic thinking. Our communities are very focused on collectivistic thinking. By that I mean, if my loved ones, if my community is okay, is coping okay, I'll be okay. It's not about me right now. It's about us coming out of this together. Unfortunately, in America, we have had the debate as to, well, I don't want to wear a mask because it infringes in my liberty, rather than framing the message as to, I need to wear a mask to take care of those I love. So it is a basic focus that we need to reframe in our interventions. And the other ones are self-compassion, gratefulness, and counting our blessings. Of course, also at the top of the list, we have faith and religiosity. You know, our immigrants rely on the protection of a higher power, regardless of what the denomination is, and on the networks that have been created in faith-based communities and creative ways to develop social support at different levels, instrumental, emotional, in terms of distraction. What are some of the ways in which we can help them? Next slide. So I want to make a call to action. What do we do with this? Do we continue to loom on the first part of the presentation, where are the stressors, or do we focus on the facilitators and help our communities make forward? And all of us, wherever we are in the world, whatever platform we can, I believe we have a call to action. Next slide, please. And this is my final message, is taking action. What is it that you can do? I think the first thing that we can do is knowledge is power. So we can build knowledge and competence, not only for ourselves, but also our colleagues, our communities. What is it that we can give them? What resources can we create to empower people to have the knowledge that they need to move forward? We need to help build a culturally and contextually competent workforce. And I'm not only talking about mental health professionals. Our primary care, our doctors, our lawyers, our immigration enforcement needs our help. They need to know how to deal with our populations, and we can be at the forefront of creating these training programs for them. Everyone has access to a platform. Use any platform that you have to destigmatize their communities, to instill a sense of pride in our immigrants, and to help them know that everybody is essential so that we can get out of this crisis. Whether your platform is academic environments where you're planting and training the future seeds, whether it's in the provision of services, whether it's in your family or in the communities or the nonprofits that you lead, you have a voice. Make your voice be heard. Use your science and clinical expertise. It's time to join our immigrant networks, our nonprofit organizations, and join forces to come out together. And most importantly, and I think this is why this Congress is so special, we need to build collaborative, binational, international, and interdisciplinary networks. We can't do it alone anymore, and the pandemic has shown us that. We need to rely on the knowledge from each other. Next slide. So my takeaway message, first point, is the current context is increasing inequality. That's not surprise all over the world. Next point. You are essential to make a difference in this crisis. Next. So I invite you to look inside the black box that many of us have refused to look for so long. But as you're looking into that black box, you have to be creative into how to brainstorm solutions to get all of us go forward. You have to be bold, you have to be flexible, and you have to be patient when you do this kind of work. And above all, take care of yourself so that we can take care of others. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcini, for your presentation. Now, the second section of this panel will be with Dr. Marius Koga. He's an associate professor and director of refugee health research in the Department of Public Health Sciences at the University of California, Davis. And Dr. Koga also directs the Ulysses Refugee Project in California. And the other presenter for this section will be Dr. Mohamed Sadiq, who is the program director and principal investigator at Sacramento Public Health Institute in California. Dr. Sadiq has a long history of service in medical and public health education, both in Afghanistan, also in Japan, and he has worked with the United Nations, the International Office of Migration, the USAID, and the Kyoto University in Japan. And now we are so privileged that he is working in California in the United States. So without further ado, please, you can start your presentation now. Thank you. Dr. Koga?
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much, Liliana, and thank you, Dori, for inviting us. It's a wonderful opportunity. Dr. Sadiq and I are former refugees before being faculty and researchers. So we speak from both a personal experience and a research external experience. What we want to share today with you is the story of the California Ulysses, the refugee trapped in between the pandemic on one hand, as you see on this slide, and between the raging fires of 5 weeks in California on toxic air. Next slide, please. Yes. So what we've seen as a primary crisis, 37 million people infected, over 1 million killed, 200 countries sent into lockdown, 7 billion lives disrupted, was only the beginning. What we have seen further on, we've seen a crisis developing into a crisis within a crisis within a crisis. So in this general context, for the 7 million vulnerable refugees around the world, struggling already with so many things, they become more vulnerable. This has created for them, especially the social distancing, given their collectivistic resilience, the social distancing, the economic issues, the wildfires and the hazardous air here in California has created a major crisis. For us as researchers, we have found ourselves being in another crisis. Many have identified important factors that worsen refugee mental health, the topic of this conference. So in terms of language barriers and access to information is not only that, it's also too much information, misinformation, contradicting information, basically an information mess. Although there are digital platforms available and information being sent to social media, again, as they say in health informatics, too much information is confusing information. There's no information at all. And then you have misalignment of social cultural differences between the refugees and the host countries. And we see that very much reflected in the enforcement of social or rather personal distancing. And we see that whether the enforcement is poor, resulting in more COVID, or is effective, resulting in erosion of collective resilience, especially in the collectivistic based refugee, we see that the effect, the outcome is still bad, is adverse. The shutdown of government services, dropout of volunteers, not only in EU or in developing countries or in Middle East or Asia, but as well here in California. The system overload, the fifth factor, is basically saying that too many needs, too many people, too many crises, too little money. The pandemic has created also major education crisis. Closure of schools, universities, technical institutes, vocational training institutes. Some countries were not able to roll out digital learning programs or started and then didn't have the funds to sustain them. The travel restriction mentioned before have created a very serious impact. We saw in March that the IOM and UNHCR announced resettlement travel suspended, and this has impacted our arrivals here in California, bringing it to a screeching halt. Then you saw some countries closing humanitarian corridors and sad cases of refoulement, asylum seekers being turned back to the countries of origin to suffer more persecution. Vaya al siguiente, por favor. Thank you. So for at least these 7 reasons, refugees now are at even higher risk than before of developing psychiatric disorders. But the story that we present here is not this, because this is the background that you're all aware of and you experience it. It is something else. It is how the crisis within the crisis impacts research work. And this is exactly what happened to us, and maybe you have experienced in your own research project the same thing. So let me tell you the story. In 2019, 2 years ago, we received the Eugene Washington PCORI, which is Patient-Centered Outcome Institute, an engagement award for 2 years to engage refugee women, mostly from Somalia, DRC, Congolese women, Iraqi, Syrian, Afghan, and Iranian women across the state to work on women's health. Siguiente, por favor. Yes, and these are, this is the research team, and we are basically connected various campuses from north to south, from San Francisco down to San Diego, and engaged a lot of communities. And we had great research design, but everything was based on interpersonal work. Next, please. However, with the pandemic and the social distancing imposed by the public health measures, our recruitment and our enrollment and our surveys came to a halt. When we realized that we need to adapt, we moved on with innovations, and we received support from the sponsor, the PCORI, and from the UC, University of California sites. And we conducted remote interviews, surveys, visits by telehealth, and using home-based technologies. Basically, we adapted. Next. This is the supplement that we received on top of the initial grant. And we received this to do virtual group meetings, so the personal became virtual. We did a survey to assess digital readiness of refugee communities. We train refugee women in Zoom, in telehealth. We looked at their access to technology. We wanted to learn about how they use social media, what's their virtual experience, telehealth experience, Zoom experience, and their desired topics. And here comes the issue, the problem. Next, please. When it comes to what do you want to hear, what do you want us to do, what do you want to discuss? The refugee women clearly expressed that their priorities were dealing with COVID-19 and with the wildfires, with the toxic air. cervical cancer, birth spacing, contraception, prenatal support were not the major priority. Women asked the research team, they asked us to reprioritize and to offer concrete support with COVID-19 education, as they were confused by so many contradicting sources of information. Dr. Garcini presented eloquently on this in many ways. What we will see throughout the Congress, we will see emerging and recurrent themes because we are in the same experience. Mental support and intervention for anxiety and depression. They asked for relevant information to be translated in Dari, Pashto, Farsi, Arabic, and so forth, readily available, uploaded in mosques and the cultural centers, and guidance on how to educate their communities, how to navigate emergency resources. So we thought initially, what we thought there was a detrimental derailment of our research work, we came to realize that it actually was a great opportunity to learn and to shift from an ethic perspective to an emic perspective. So in a way, taking a moral stance and adopting a better logical approach for the current situation, we saw how a crisis within a crisis created research within research, a sort of meta-research in which our initial project transformed itself, and it was now driven by the refugees, not by us. And maybe in some more genuine way, this is community engagement. This is a refugee engagement, exactly what the word was given for. Now I want to ask my colleague Sadiq to zoom in the Afghan community, one of the most vulnerable communities within our study. And as Liliana said, that 14% of the American population is born somewhere else, is immigrant. You may know that in California, about every third person around you on the street or anywhere is born somewhere else. And many of them come from Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and the Afghans are extremely vulnerable. Sadiq, please.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and honor to be in this conference, and thank you, Dr. Kuga, for setting this stage so well. Reference Afghan refugees, they made 63.8% of all refugee arrivals in 2018 in California, and during the same year, 52% of the refugees choose to reside in Sacramento, obviously because San Francisco Bay Area is now an expensive place to live in. So now we have roughly 10,000 Afghan refugees living in Sacramento. Next slide, please. In addition to Sacramento, Afghan refugees are mainly residing in 9 other counties in the state of California, from Sacramento up in the north to San Diego in the south. Next slide, please. Afghan refugees in the United States are from the more affluent and well-educated segment of Afghanistan society compared to Afghans in Pakistan, Iran, Middle East, and even Europe. For example, an Afghan should be at least a high school graduate and fluent in English to end up in the United States as an interpreter, but for Afghans moving to Pakistan, Iran, and Arab countries, they don't need that credentials. But despite being from higher economic and educational class in Afghanistan, the Afghan refugees are among the low-income and vulnerable communities in the United States compared to other nationalities. And the reason is that Afghans come as refugees and uprooted persons and not as economic migrants. The majority have gone through numerous traumatic experiences and severe hardships such as war, trauma, torture, poverty, uncertainty before arrival to United States. In most cases, when Afghans come to United States, some of their health problems such as depression, anxiety, and somatoform disorders and communicable diseases do not end, but rather change its geography from Afghanistan to United States. And additionally, the Afghan refugees will face challenges of settlement and adjustment here. Next slide, please. Afghan refugees are a very connected and collectivistic community. Their resilience and vulnerabilities are determined by all interconnected members, as it was mentioned for other migrants from Latin America. They conceptualize, experience, and respond to perceived risk not only as an individual, but equally so to their family members here in the United States, back in Afghanistan or elsewhere. For example, a refugee might be doing okay here, but he or she worries for family in Afghanistan. Or, for example, someone brother has lost source of income in Afghanistan. Now the refugee here is under increased pressure to make arrangements and send a couple of $100s a month so that their families can make a living back home. They usually get their information and news from each other through social media such as Facebook, WhatsApp, and Viber, and not via traditional news outlets. While this method of communication is advantageous in terms of speed and access, but this information system is also prone to bias, misinformation, and confusion. Next slide, please. So with all these vulnerabilities, now the refugees have to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic challenges, which have disrupted their lives and minds, and have put unprecedented challenges on the Afghan refugee community here in California. First of all, many have lost their source of income, as many were self-employed, such as ride sharing with Uber and Lyft, and also involved in non-skilled jobs that they cannot do remotely. And second, as it was mentioned, and for the migrants in from Latin America, visiting or meeting friends and family, congregating in mosque for the Friday prayers is at the core of the Afghan culture, which was disrupted by the public health and stay-at-home orders and social restrictions. This has greatly reduced their collective resilience. So here I want to quote an Afghan refugee community member who I recently interviewed. Quote, I want to contract coronavirus. I'm tired of its fear. I'm tired of social distancing and this whole situation. I don't care if I die or I get over it, quote. So you can see how frustrated and exhausted the refugee community is, whose capacity to cope is now stretched even farther and beyond their resilience. And community leaders are especially alarmed and saddened by a tragic incident that happened last week in an Afghan market where an Afghan refugee, apparently with mental illness, shot himself and 3 others. So the community is really worried and hope that this is not an indication of larger silent mental health crisis in the community. So with that said, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siddiq and Dr. Koga. So now the next panelist for this session is Mrs. Maria Elena Ferrer, who is the Executive Director of Humanamente, and she's based in New York, and she's also the chair of the Atenea Network in New York. Please welcome Mrs. Maria Elena Ferrer.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We are very, very short in time, so I hope that you can bear with us until we finish. I will try to be brief. but I really would like you to get a sense of what we have accomplished with this exhibition. I've been doing workshops in the Hudson Valley for about 10 years now, and reaching out to mental health providers, prime care physicians, and a lot of professionals working with immigrants. And more or less in this time, we have reached out to 500 people, and we have trained them in at least to be aware of the migratory mourning and all the difficulties in mental health that the immigrant population presents. And I have to say that in a month and a half that this exhibition has been out there, we have reached more than that population. And it's been a broader public that has now realized that definitely they can look at the immigrant population with different eyes. So this is just to let you know how powerful art can be in transmitting a message, and at least this is the experience that we have had so far. So this installation pretended to be a very immersive installation art where the public is going to have an experience, not only watching the art presented to them, but also having a feedback and being part of the exhibition itself. We definitely are still in an experimental timeline right now, but we hope this is the first one of a series of installations that are already in progress. Next, please. So this is part of the artist statement that I create for this exhibition. And my point here was to highlight that how the immigrants, when they feel lost in this alien society, as many mentioned, we have to negotiate the here and now of our reality, of our living experiences, with the then and there of our cultural memories. You know, it's like we are the same person, but we are not the same. We used to say we need to come up with a lot to develop our resilience in a very quick time if we want to make it, if we want to survive, and if we want to really thrive in the society that for most of all of us this is our main goal. Next, please. So in designing this exhibition, we have 5 different stations. I'm going to show you only one of them. It's based in this scheme from Dr. Gelasia Marquez, who is a Cuban-American psychiatrist here in the States, where she somehow created these stations on the process from the moment that the person feels dissatisfied in the country of origin before becoming an immigrant, and then if there is a happy ending to this story, when there is an engagement procedure and a new sense of belonging in the new society. So these are the different steps that somehow she illustrated, and we use that to create this exhibition. And I'm gonna show you part of what is in the migration process to the right of the screen, that part of the identity crisis, where there is a cultural confusion and conflict, and there are ambiguous feelings towards self and the host society as a whole. Next, please. Okay, this was the card for the presentation that we used to market in the exhibition, and we installed this exhibition in the Department of Regional Art Workers, who basically utilizes art as a means to empower the disenfranchised and the underserved population in the city of Kingston in New York State. This was the perfect place to do that because of the variety and the diversity of the people that stop by in this place, that also is in a new building that is becoming already a landmark of the city and is having a lot of attraction. Also due to the pandemic, many people from New York City is moving to the area, and this is becoming a hub for people to meet. So it was like quite a perfect venue for this. Next, please. So this is what you see from the street. This is the first screen. The photo is not very good, but people stop to this to see what is going on here, because this is a workshop. This is a place to work with art. It's not a gallery, but people tend to stop here and find out what is happening, and following the guidelines from the CDC, having a maximum, of people inside of the area. Everybody's been masked, and we are tracking every person that enters to the gallery, but they also have the option to enjoy part of the exhibition from the street. So we wanted to make it very, very accessible for everyone. Next. So this is the first layout, what I try you to see through the photography, but obviously in this graphic, you can see it clearly. We have the presentation to the right with the artist book that looks like a sculptor. This is a very complicated piece that I may not have time to explain today. But basically, I just wanted to catch the eye of the people with this new concept of the transnational migrancy, who deterritorializes individual, takes out of their own territory the people that is coming to this new society, and expose us to the erosion of our national memories, and also the pop memory, the globalization, everything that we are now like sponge absorbing from the new society, forced us to rebuild this, what I call the territorialized cultural memories. Next, please. So in the other side of these panels, you will find this. To the left, we have an introduction to what is the exhibition. Explaining that explores what I call the migrant culture, or the culture in diaspora, that is marked by estrangement and psychosocial dissociation, so that the migrants always feel in transit, suspended between these two worlds, the world that we came from and the world that we are now. And in the middle of the confusion of that identity confusion, we have the panel to the right, where I bring attention to what it is, that long and slow, painful process of acculturation, that definitely the conclusion of that process is not certain. So for many people, it becomes a traumatic experience. We don't see, they are not visible, those effects, but definitely the crisis of identities happen in the inside. And I'm playing here with two of my personal cultural memories related to my culture of origin from Venezuela, and two icons of the American culture that has a lot of feeling for a lot of people. So in this panel is where we have most of the conversations with the public. Next, please. So you can see now the actual picture inside of the place. This is what you see from outside. Next one. This is the book that I was mentioning before. In the cover of the book, you can see to the right that I'm talking about the tension that generates a divided and flexible identity. And that's what this book is. It's a book that is divided into like accordion. They are flexible, but definitely talk about two different identities for the person. Next. This is just different views. People can play with the book, they can read it. Inside there is a lot of food for thought, and we're having a bunch of feedback from this one too. Next. Then we have this, what I call my pop culture screen. Obviously based on the famous Andy Warhol treatment of Marilyn Monroe portrait that many of you may be familiar with, but you may not know who is the person that I'm using here. Next. So the person that I'm using is this brand that many of you may not know, but if you are Venezuelan or maybe even Colombian, you will know this brand. And this is the corn flour that we use to make our famous arepas. You can see the next one. If you never had an arepa, please try one, because this is the best food that you can find. So I use this brand. If we can go back one slide, perfect. I use this brand because for Venezuelans like me, this image definitely brings home with us. We don't know who this woman was. We don't know her name, but that's the spirit of Venezuela in a package. That's why I wanted to present it in this panel. Next one. Okay, so this is the actual panel also for the other image. If you see that there are some structures hanging in front of them, those are my visualization of the deterritorialized memories. Inside of each one of them, there were little memories from my childhood, and I invited people to also add theirs to the exhibition. We are still collecting them, but I just wanted you to know what is happening here. Next. So here we show them the image of the refugees coming. Can be a very sober image, but also I wanted to highlight in the second half of this image the promise of a new generation, and that new generation that is in color, because despite the history that I'm showing here is not precisely the most cheering one, we always keep the hope with us. Next one. Next slide, please. Okay, and then this guy is amazing, all the emotions that this image have brought. I added to this graphic the words of one of the deputy ISIS director from the Trump administration, who basically was telling every immigrant, you should be worried because no population is off the table. And, you know, I wanted to make a tribute for the people that has been separated in the border, the children's cages that before Luz Garcini was reminded us are happening in the frontier with Mexico. And these two images in the front of this graphic, the mom with the kid that's still looking at the future with a little bit of fear, and obviously with the shadow of this administration, particularly with this piece. When this piece was shown in one of our campus, university campus, it was vandalized. So it was definitely, it triggered some of the situations that we are living now, not only here, but in the world. And it was definitely a piece that we wanted to keep because it's one of the most controversial ones, but also the ones that people definitely feel more empathy with. Next, please. And then here we come back to this composition that I showed you before. There are more memories hanging out that maybe you can see some of them, but definitely you need to be in the space. And also, as I said before, we invited people to bring their memories to include it in these structures. I wanted to use the mask because even though they are part of my culture of origin, we are living in a very masking identity times. Nowadays, most of us are wearing masks, not for a cultural purpose, but if we care about public health, we are trying to use them. And it reminds me that we are all in disguise, you know, that they are somehow, we are hiding part of our identity, but at the same time that we hide our identities, the masks are also exposing part of that. And another particular thing that the mask that I love to highlight is that they not only change somehow the person who wears them, but also change the person that interacts with the person who is wearing the mask. So that was also another opportunity to create a conversation. Next one. Finally, this is the part of the self-portrait where I bring the opportunity to the public to know a little bit more about myself. Next slide. And this is my interpretation of my American dream in times of COVID. Definitely supported by the American flag, enjoying my little shot of disinfectant recommended by this administration with a bit of the hydroxychloroquine that back in the days was recommended too, and the famous stimulus check that we don't really know exactly what to do with it. But this piece, by the way, is being now in auction because a lot of people want to get it. So we are trying to use that as a fundraiser to keep the project alive. Next one, please. And then just keeping the healthy of the people, those that were not wearing masks, we were sharing with them the image of our exhibition, and also keeping well care of our public health. Next one, and if you have any question, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena, for your presentation. I think that they really give a nice twist to the conversation, how we can use art to create some more awareness of the situation of the immigrants in the United States. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to respect everybody's time. Some of you might have to go to bed. Some of us need to continue working because it's very early here. But I really want to appreciate and thank Dr. Luz Garcini, Dr. Marius Koga, Dr. Mohamed Sadiq, and Maria Elena Ferrer for their time, for sharing your knowledge and your insight with this panel. Just remind you that tomorrow we will continue with the Congress with this Zoom link here at Berkeley. We will have the panelists from Peru and from Mexico. And then the other group will be Italy and Colombia. And at the end, we will have, again, joint closing ceremony. So whatever is your time, whatever you are right now, tomorrow we are at the same time, we will see each other virtually through this medium. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.